Welcome, everyone. My name is Jack Hanna. I'm a retired attorney from Western Pennsylvania, having served with the Pennsylvania Democratic State Committee for almost 30 years, including 5 as its state treasurer and 6 months as its chair. I've attended 7 Democratic National Conventions in an official capacity, and I welcome you here tonight to our Zoom town hall, which focuses on the 50-year decline and fall of the American economy and the path forward. I'm very much looking forward to our presentation tonight. We have a stellar group of people that are making presentations, especially to respected, nationally renowned authorities with regard to politics and economics, in addition to our supporting members of the coalition who are going to be presenting tonight. The United States is now at a critical point. Either we continue down the path of economic destruction, exemplified by the brutal austerity of the Trump administration and the Congress, or we reverse gears and return to the infrastructure and manufacturing programs last implemented by Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt, Kennedy, and even the Eisenhower administration. If we fail to embrace what is known as Alexander Hamilton's American system, which creates an infrastructure bank, our fate is going to be very bleak. Tonight we have 2 special guests that we are welcoming, Robert Kuttner and Alan Minsky, who have lectured and published extensively on the shift in principles that occurred following the death of John Kennedy and the downfall of Lyndon Johnson. Professor Kuttner is a leading expert in the policies of Franklin Roosevelt, and that's where we want to go. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to move this through our agenda very, very quickly. And we will start off by having our first presenter speak, Alfeka Muhtard, who is a professional microeconomist, former senior economist for the International Monetary Fund, Chief Economic Advisor for the Coalition of a National Infrastructure Bank, member of the Advisory Board of the Coalition, and has testified in numerous state legislatures, city and county councils, including yesterday in the Illinois State Senate. Alfeka, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me again. I would like to start off with giving a little refresher course on how the National Infrastructure Bank policy works to set this up as what I consider to be our one and only chance at turning our path forward, because all of the other paths that we've tried lately are just simply not working. So we have, and this is, apologies to people who've heard the pitch before, but in case we have anybody on board that hasn't heard it, I wanted to explain how it works. So we have a piece of legislation in the U.S. Congress. In the last session of the Congress, it was H.R. 4052. It's going to be reintroduced shortly. It's all prepped and ready and sent off to the House Leg Council. But the purpose of this bank and this legislation is to create a $5 trillion bank to lend for infrastructure projects all across the country, because that's the key to building up the economy and creating the demand and putting people back to work that we need to turn our fortunes and economic activity around. The proof of the pudding that we need this bank is because just lately, the American Society of Civil Engineers came out with a new report card. And what they said is that the unfunded gap for infrastructure has grown by an additional 40% over the last 4 years alone. So we really need this bank. Budgets, state budgets, federal budgets are not enough. private capital money is not enough, this bank will top up all the financing that we need to create great paying jobs and fix our infrastructure. We had 48 members of Congress on the bill. We worked really, really hard to see if we could try and get some Republicans on. We haven't been successful so far, but we're going to keep on trying because this is really a bipartisan act. Everybody needs infrastructure. Everybody needs their roads fixed. So the way that this bank works is like the same method as the previous four banks we've had in our nation's past, starting after the American Revolutionary War, going through the Great Depression and World War II. We're going to hear a lot more from our speakers on how this worked in the past and how it can work today at the local legislative level. The reason these banks aren't around is because their charter's timed out. So one feature of this new bill is that we hope it'll be a permanent bank, long-term financing, reliable financing. It'll work very much like the permanent banks that are all around the world, in Europe, in Japan, in Canada, in China, because we need a permanent bank to finance infrastructure. So this is how it works. Actually, it operates the same as any commercial lending bank. So to open the doors of this bank, we need to first get it adequately capitalized. That's money that the owners put into the bank to backstop the loans in case there's an economic downturn or somebody doesn't repay. To do that, we use the private sector's holdings of treasuries. So we'll go to the private sector who are holding about 27 trillion, 29 trillion dollars in treasuries for all around the world for savings, investment purposes. We just need a few of them, 500 billion to capitalize 1 to 10. We'll ask them if they would like to sell in their treasuries, exchange for preferred stock. They'll get a boost on the dividend. And that extra stream of money comes out of interest earnings from the NIB's loans. What this means is we don't need to rely on the federal budget to finance and open this bank. This bank operates on its own. Then it gives out a loan just like any commercial bank does, uses the same accounting software, banking rules, actually creates money when it gives out a loan. That's a surprise to most people. They don't know that commercial banks do that. This bank would also do it, just the same as the others. And the loan terms are great for the borrowers. Low interest rates, flexible repayment terms, and then borrowers would be state and local governments, any public entity that owns a bit of public infrastructure, a county, a city for a road, a bridge, a school, can come in directly to the IB and ask for a loan. We've recently been talking with a lot of county legislators, city legislators, people on, in state legislators who are struggling with their budgets right now. They're really looking forward to the bank financing these projects. We have 5 trillion available. Yeah.
Forgive me for interrupting, but we will come back to you. Let us go and
No
proceed
problem.
to our special guest and
Super.
then circle back to have you complete your
That'll be
presentation
great.
and answer any questions.
Okay.
Thank you
Super.
so much. Next, I am very pleased and thankful that we have a guest tonight that is nationally renowned and who is very accomplished and agrees with many of our assertions with regard to the economic challenges that we face today in the United States. Robert Kuttner is a co-founder and co-editor of the American Prospect, a very interesting, on-point publication with regard to politics and economics. And he's also a professor at Brandeis University's Heller School. He's highly acclaimed as an economic journalist and was a longtime columnist with Business Week and the Boston Globe. He was a national staff writer and columnist on with the Washington Post and chief investigator of the U.S. Senate Banking Committee. He was the founder of the Economic Policy Institute and serves on its board. He's the author of 12 books, his latest being Going Big, FDR's Legacy, Biden's New Deal, and the Struggle to Save Democracy. Perfectly on point as far as our topics are tonight. Robert, we're pleased to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think you're on mute. I do that all the time.
Jack, thanks very much. And not to contradict you, but I've been learning a lot from Alfeca's presentation. So as they say on the Hill, let me yield 5 minutes of my time so that she can finish her presentation, and then I'll go.
Very good. Alfecca, the floor is yours again. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very gracious of you. Let me pull back my slides up again here. Where am I? There we go. So this bank is sized to be large enough to cover all of our infrastructure needs as they're defined by the American Society of Civil Engineers. So how much do we need? 5 trillion at least. And that will allow us to repair all of our broken transportation systems, water systems, the power grid, and our bank adds on a little bit more money to make a first swipe at doing a complete high-speed rail network all across the country, broadband everywhere, affordable housing, and large-scale water projects. And we want to integrate all of these projects as well. We really think this will reboot the American economy. It's the only way to do it. Budgets are tapped out. The private sector is not interested in making these kinds of investments in public infrastructure. The activity will create 25 million new great paying jobs. It won't get lost in budget fights or budget cuts or anything like that. It requires no new federal taxes, spending, or debt, makes it politically acceptable to fiscal conservatives. It will reassure American manufacturing. And this is the secret to solving our debt problem, which is the base of our budget problem right now. It'll double GDP growth, and we can grow out of our debt problems the same way we did after World War II with the great participation of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to get us out of the Great Depression and win the war. So that's where I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Alfecca. Robert, this time I'm going to yield the floor to you. And I can see you have unmuted, so we're good to go. Please proceed, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for this project. And I'm going to write something about this because I think it deserves a lot more attention. Let me try and locate this in the history of the past 100 years or so. Basically, public outlay and public infrastructure was terribly important in getting us out of the Great Depression. And of course, we finally got out of the Great Depression with World War II. on the eve of World War II, despite Roosevelt's deficits, despite Roosevelt's public investments, Roosevelt's deficits were only about 3 or 4% of GDP. And on the eve of the World War II buildup, the unemployment rate was still over 12%. And of course, World War II was both a great Keynesian experiment, if you will, in demand stimulus, but it was also a great Schumpeterian experiment in that public spending for the war generated all kinds of new technologies that had civilian spin-offs. And then that in turn led to Vannevar Bush's endless frontier of investment in science and technology. And my point is that 80 years later, we are still living off that legacy, but that legacy has wound down. It's not as powerful as it was right after the war. And if you think of the great public investments of the Depression and the war and how quickly they got done, the great dams, TVA, this stuff got built in 2 or 3 years. And George Washington Bridge, stuff that would take 10 years today because of stop and start financing, got built quickly. And it created stimulus. It also created entities that added to national productivity growth. And the other thing it did was it taught a lesson that public is often, if not always, more efficient than private. So you take the case of public power. Public power is cheaper, more efficient, more friendly to dealing with climate change than private power. And a very nice case in point is the municipally owned power system in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is kind of a stepchild of the TVA. It's not accidental that Chattanooga happens to have a publicly owned, municipally owned power system. And the good people who run that decided that, hey, here's a basis for economic development. We could have the fastest internet in the country and the cheapest internet in the country, and that in turn would attract industry that needs fast, cheap internet. So for 79 bucks a month, if you are fortunate enough to live in Chattanooga, you can get 1 gig uh, Wi-Fi, you can get television, and you can get telephone. And this is about half the price that the privately owned utility just across the city line charges. And over and over again, as these spurious public-private partnerships have gotten traction, we've learned that public is more efficient. It's not only investment that we need, but it's more efficient than private. And so it seems to me that the Public Infrastructure Bank, which is a terrific idea in its own right, is part of a broader narrative of reclaiming the value of that which is public as necessary, as valuable, and as often more efficient than private. I was recently in Europe and was marveling at the London Underground, the Paris Metro. These are systems that have never stopped investing in modernizing in public infrastructure. So the trains go every minute or two. As one is pulling out, the next one is pulling in. They are utterly reliable. And you compare this with the Boston MBTA or the New York subway system, you just want to weep because we have underinvested in this public infrastructure going back 50 and 75 years. I don't know if you saw the piece in the New York Times, but there was a piece in the New York Times about the signal system for the New York subway system. And the signal system is basically about 100 employees in underground rooms with 1930s technology pushing buttons to indicate whether the light is red or green for a train. And if the employee needs to take a bathroom break, the trains stop. And it is antiquated beyond belief. The technology that created it or that it relies upon doesn't even exist anymore. And just the New York subway system alone could consume a lot of investment in infrastructure. So let me also locate this in the context of Donald Trump being president. I mean, some people may think that it's premature or grandiose to imagine a post-Trump America when the urgent task right now is to contain Trump. But I think this is exactly the right time for our side of the debate to think big, to dream big, because we need a big vision. And while it would be a gross overstatement to say that Trump has done us a favor by trashing public institutions, one consequence of Trump's recklessness is that people are going to start appreciating once again the value of public institutions. They're going to appreciate the value of the Weather Bureau. They're going to appreciate the value of FEMA. They're going to appreciate the value of the Center for Disease Control. And so this is exactly the right time to be launching a big vision that reclaims the value of that which is public. So I thank you for doing this, and I thank you for inviting me to participate.
Thank you so much, Robert. And again, I urge our participants to look at and read and subscribe to the American Prospect. It's an excellent publication that provides a perspective that we all need to read, understand, and appreciate. So thank you again, Robert, for joining us tonight. We'll have questions very shortly, so be prepared. Our next guest before the questions is Alan Minsky, who is also nationally renowned, serves currently as the executive director of the Progressive Democrats of America. He's a lifelong activist who's worked in progressive journalism for the past, 2 decades. Alan was the program director for KPFK Los Angeles from 2009 to 2018. and has coordinated Pacifica Radio's national coverage of elections. Before that, Alan was one of the founders of LA Indymedia. He is the creator and producer of political podcasts for The Nation magazine, as well as a contributor to Common Dreams and Truth Dig. Welcome, Alan, tonight. We're pleased and appreciative of you joining us, and we're very happy to hear you speak.
Thank you so much. And I have a first question in the queue for Robert Kuttner too. So as Robert respected not that if you could just hold on to this, but maybe address it. A poll came out that maybe many of you saw, and I'll try to drop into the chat from our friends over at Demand Progress that made chat is blocked. Well, they had a poll which basically tested the Ezra Klein abundance agenda versus a more progressive politics among the general population and Democratic voters in particular. And Klein's position just had very little support against a more progressive vision. And of course, Klein's critique and one of his main talking points has been to highlight the failure of the production of high-speed rail in California, which of course the National Infrastructure Bank speaks to. And certainly in Klein's proposal, which seems sort of like a Blairism 2.0. So you take the third way and maybe it's 3.2 or 3.5. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear how maybe Robert Kuttner thinks about Klein's proposals versus something that does include something as structural and institutional as a National Infrastructure Bank anchoring a more progressive vision for America, one that's more anchored in addressing, wealth inequality and other sort of populist touch points that in the poll from Demand Progress today, just absolutely rounded on Klein's proposals in terms of their popularity with Democratic voters and more popular among independent voters in the general population. The things I want to maybe focus on are just very, very broad stroke observations. And I really appreciate Robert Kuttner's comments around the public and public expenditures and public projects. And of course, the great devaluation of public projects began, especially for its resonance with the national population with the election of Ronald Reagan in 1981. And I believe his name's Gary Gensler. People have to forgive me. I actually am overcoming COVID. And my mind's been a little hazy the past few days, but an excellent American historian who I believe is at Oxbridge, either Oxford or Cambridge. And
Gary Gerstle.
Gary Gerstle, thank you. There we go. Thank you. See, I knew that wasn't quite clicking correctly.
Yeah, Gensler was the SEC guy.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Yes. Yes, Gary Gerstle. And he's written two books, The Rise and Fall of, the most recent one is of the Neoliberal Order. And before that, he wrote a book that basically was the rise and fall, as it were, of the New Deal order or the Keynesian economic order. And in the rise and fall of the neoliberal order book, you can basically look at, Reaganism and Thatcherism, and then you get matched in the opposition parties basically embracing the central logic, which of course includes privatization over public expenditure, especially rhetorically, but also practically, and a devaluation of public expenditure. And we now have when you have economic evidence from 45 years of economic history, I think the broad scale popular conclusion to draw from the era of neoliberalism is that basically is an economic scheme in which wealth all draws up into the investor class and the general population stagnates or is at best sort of stuck on a gerbil wheel. And all sorts of expenditures start accruing that guarantee even a two-income household that can seem like it's on the pathway to middle-class security is faced with these very high expenditures across their lifetime, such as childcare, housing, of course, and the cost of college and the cost of medical bills, all of which, to a significant degree, play into the logic of the devaluation of the public versus the private. And so, it's not just a matter of Bernie Sanders focusing on the 40% of the population, which is a great focus, a way to frame things around the 40% of the population that lives paycheck to paycheck. The American social contract is very unappetizing to a vast majority of the population at this hour. Now, the thing I'm going to bring into this, because I can't help myself, as the executive director of Progressive Democrats of America, is I would like maybe this audience to consider the use value of all of this of the Democratic Party, where there is right now, I think, a pretty overt struggle for the soul of the party between the progressive wing of the party, a wing that will embrace the ideas about infrastructure expenditures. I noticed that David Robinson was one of the mentioned speakers, and as maybe some of the people on the call know, Progressive Democrats of America. I think in sharp contrast, actually, just to boost our little organization a bit, marked contrast to the other sort of prominent national progressive organizations. When I got into the position, I very much scrambled to make sure that manufacturing was a priority and the growth of manufacturing a priority for PDA. And so with Manufacturing Renaissance, which David Robinson is on the board of, we've introduced a bill through Jan Schakowsky's office, supported by Ro Khanna and a number of other progressive legislators, calling for a Manufacturing Renaissance Act, a particular strategy to try to actually deliver the growth of manufacturing in a way that produces high road manufacturing. And of course, we also embrace ideas like the National Infrastructure Bank and other really sort of institutional economic approaches to reforming the American economy. But how do we achieve public consciousness of this necessity, right? And the kind of like core economic institutional projects that are the focus of this call, they're not on the top checklists of the general public in terms of how we approach achieving an American social contract in which wealth is distributed more justly. I mean, certainly taxing the wealthy and the hyper wealthy is part of the PDA agenda, of course, and that would come to mind more. But we need, right, what was so well achieved in the United States in the Rooseveltian era through until maybe the economic crises of the 1970s, which was the generation of wealth facilitated by the Rooseveltian public infrastructural institutional organization. And so in other words, we not only have to have the populist arguments, we need an economic strategy that, built off of the economic reality of the present, can produce and generate wealth for our society and also a better social contract package. And how can that be achieved? How can that be achieved in ways that can navigate the terrain in which deficit spending is, and the blowing up the federal deficit is probably a very difficult thing for the public to digest. MMTers notwithstanding, I don't know. The big problem there is probably animal spirits in the bond markets and the stock markets, maybe more than the economic theory, but that's a reality. So I think these kind of projects like the National Infrastructure Bank, clear institutional organizational strategies to generate manufacturing growth in the United States of America, and then strategies to make, and I loved in Alpaca's presentation that you have housing right there, federal funds available through a National Infrastructure Bank to produce housing. Of the four big bills that I mentioned for middle-class families to absorb, that's probably the easiest to contend with it because it is a big infrastructure project, right? Medicare for all and national child care, Medicare for all takes a lot of institutional adjustments. And you have 18% of GDP would shrink down to 12% of GDP. I'd love to have Bob one day to hear Bob Kuttner's reflections on how that can be navigated. That is a big issue, right? You'd have a huge deflationary pressure. It's not actually going to cost more for the society to go to Medicare for all. It's going to evaporate all these excess expenditures and money that circulates, and no doubt are parts of the money that gets pooled and invested by the investor class. But nonetheless, the social contract package that Americans will look for is to contain the costs of these high bill components of their life, and also generate a dynamic economy through the kind of strategies that we're talking about in this. And that's a complex message for the public. Tax the wealthy. Let's just have national free health care. Let's have a living wage is easier for the public to digest. But even then, how do you reach the public with the message? And this is where I would encourage people to not give up on this battle inside the Democratic Party. And it's the battle that PDA fights every day of the week. And that is because there are two political parties in this country for whatever reason. We all have our theories and ideas as to why it has fallen out or it always shakes out that way, but it is how it always shakes out. And as disgusted as people are with the contemporary Democratic Party and the Republican Party, certainly from the Democratic or the opposition point of view, when Donald Trump is the alternative, you're not going to have third-party spinoffs. Okay? So I would encourage people to get down into the necessary fight inside the Democratic Party. Do what you can as individuals and in your networks to encourage this kind of institutional, economic, or organizational transition in terms of Democratic policies, to have them be strengthened and anchoring the Democratic Party going forward. That things like the abundance agenda put forward by Ezra Klein, the kind of incrementalist neoliberal approaches that you still see from a significant branch of the Democratic Party, and let's face it, the institutionally remaining dominant branch of the Democratic Party. If those neoliberal strategies continue to define the Democratic Party, then you're ceding all social change when the social contract is unacceptable to the fascist right. That's a terrible, terrible equation. So I think on the one hand, yes, we have to work with the politicians who can reach the public, but we also have to make sure there's a sound set of economic policies that anchor the party, that can generate wealth in a society, that can create a working class like the post-Rooseveltian economic contract did, where the working class has money in their pockets. They're not suffering debt loads. And that's the dynamism of the economy as it was the dynamism of the economy from certainly from 1945 to 1970. So sorry if that was a little bit muddled and not that clear, but again, I think it's important to not lose sight of the two-party system that we're operating in, and to be engaged with what is a very, very risky thing that's transpiring right now, which is the strong effort by the sort of established moneyed wing of the Democratic Party to re-marginalize the progressive wing of the party. I think the base of the Democratic Party is very much, as the Demand Progress poll shows, with the progressive wing. That does not translate into winning any primaries at all. And so keep all that in mind, and let's move forward with the work that you're putting forward so brilliantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I'm going to agree with you wholeheartedly about the Democratic Party being the, I think, only vehicle by which we can really make change as far as this country is concerned. I also think the party needs to acknowledge its failures, and that it has become a consultant class that has ignored the base, and that we have suffered the consequences of their failure as far as being honest with the American public as to what our leaders are capable of doing and should be doing. But that's another Zoom call that we will not delve into at the moment. At this point in time, I'm going to open up the forum for questions for both Robert and Alan. And Robert, maybe you might want to take a stab first at Alan's first question, and then I see several hands up, and we'll go from there thereafter. So go ahead, Robert, you can speak to that.
Well, Ezra got his start at the American Prospect. He was a writing fellow, and then he was a staff writer for 5 years. We don't always get it right. And Ezra went astray. I think the so-called abundance agenda, his stuff on zoning as the cause of the housing shortage is just flat out wrong. I mean, the major cause of the housing shortage is that we've stopped building social housing.
Yeah.
And we've given up on rent control. And you can have all the zoning, 2-family and 3-family and 4-family stuff in the world, and that's not going to alleviate the housing shortage unless you get some serious public money into housing. I think he's got one germ of important truth. Stuff takes too long.
Mhm.
And somewhere between the invention of environmental impact statements and the desire to have small d democracy so that everybody gets to weigh in at the local level before a project can go forward, we went off the rails. Now, that doesn't mean you want to go back to the days of Robert Moses, where you have a dictatorial local development figure who just runs roughshod. But there has to be a happy medium between the kind of paralysis that we have in approving new public projects and the dictatorial reign of Robert Moses. So that chapter of Klein's book is useful The rest of it, I just think, is so much neoliberalism.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Now we have several questions. Forgive me if I don't get the questionnaires in the order that they request, but I'm going to start off with Mark, if you could go first.
Thank you. The Prospect may have given us Ezra Klein, but it also gave us Josh Marshall and Jamel Bowie. So you do pretty well.
We did pretty well.
And Alan, I knew your father briefly at Washington University when I was a grad student.
Oh, great.
My question is, for the next 4 years, we're not going to get a national infrastructure bank. Are there realistic proposals for state-level infrastructure banks?
This is not my expertise. Maybe Alfecca knows.
Yes, we do have some proposals around. Actually, this Ellen Brown is here, and this is a better answered by her. We do have some news on that. There is a public banking institute which is pushing both state banks and the national bank, and we think these can complement each other. So, Ellen, you want to unmute and
Well, we've got a number of bills pending for public banks, so state-owned banks, city-owned banks, county-owned banks, et cetera. The one existing model is the Bank of North Dakota, which goes back to 1919. It's done a brilliant job of taking the money of the state and leveraging it for public purposes, including infrastructure and manufacturing in that state. And it's protected the banks, et cetera. I mean, we've all written quite a bit about the Bank of North Dakota. But, and so we have a number of groups working on, I think we have groups in practically every state working on state-owned banks, but we don't have any banks yet, but definitely working on it.
And let's remember, this is North Dakota, which is proof that populism can go left or can go right. And the National Bank, the State Bank of North Dakota is a product of the year when the nonpartisan league governed. And that's the point. You have to take the populist impulse that, for lack of anything better on the part of conservative Democrats, as captured by Trump, and recapture it for our side.
Thank you very much, Ellen. We will circle back with you a little bit later, and I correct myself. We have 3 national presenters tonight that have reputations throughout the entire country. We have several questions. I'm going to ask people to be very brief when they ask them, and also the answers if possible, and to identify yourself before asking the question. Scott Aldridge, I think you're up next, and please introduce yourself and ask the question.
Hi, my name is Scott Aldridge. I am a member of the Washington State Democratic Central Committee. This is my first time to one of these meetings, and I'm very impressed by the idea. It seems like an ideal project that would get bipartisan support. Is there any specific opposition we have been running into when presenting it to Republicans? Because this seems like something, I mean, I understand that they're a little wonky now, but like.
Oh, let me take a stab at that. Scott, my impression is that the Republican Party is completely focused on MAGA, and they don't want to have anything to do with any other kinds of concepts or ideas. They're in the process of dismantling federal government,
Right.
and this, in their minds, I presume, smells too much like federal government. And then when you add on top of that a figure of $5 trillion, they just freak out. And so my opinion is it's an ideologically driven refusal to even consider the proposal to begin with. Next, we're going to have one of our speakers ask a question, and we will circle back to him later in order to make his presentation. Randy Voller, you're up with your question. Thank you.
Yeah, this could be either for Robert or Alan. Uh, I was a state party chair in North Carolina, and we founder of the Labor Caucus in the state, which it's a very low labor state, hard to get that organized. And I was a local mayor here for 4 terms. It was my experience going back to working with Obama when he ran, and then doing the first ARRA stimulus funds and bringing money to our town, that the problem seems to be in the structure as to when the enabling legislation gets written and passed and actually getting the dollars into the community. Uh, Ezra Klein has talked about that, but I'd be curious what you guys think we could do. It's not everything is environmental regulations, but even the broadband bill, which everyone wants to see happen, very little money actually got to our communities, and then it allowed a new administration to impound the funds. So I'd be curious what you would think from your perspective, how we could speed that up so that when we actually are in control, the money actually can reach the local counties and municipalities.
Well, I
Robert,
think,
first, and then Alan, go ahead.
well, I think the brilliance of the National Infrastructure Bank proposal is that you don't have to go through the federal bureaucracy. A municipality or a state or a housing authority or whoever applies to the bank for a loan, and they're either approved or they're not approved, and the money is forthcoming. So it's a way of short-circuiting what has become a somewhat hidebound process of getting federal money out. Now, I would hasten to add, I don't want to give up on the rest of the federal government. So while we are launching this National Infrastructure Bank with one hand, I think we got to figure out how to streamline the federal process of getting money out with the other hand.
Alan.
Yeah, I was going to actually throw to Bob about that wasn't a problem in FDR's day. Why compare the money getting out to the provinces, as it were, under FDR compared to today?
Well, and a lot of one of the reasons was a lot of that was just direct federal money.
Mhm.
It wasn't federal state partnerships. It wasn't public-private partnerships. The WPA was federal money. The Civilian Conservation Corps was federal money. The Great Western Dams was federal money. So you could just do it. And it's not quite as simple now, but you could certainly learn a lot by studying in detail how they got the money out much more expeditiously during the New Deal.
Thank you.
Next, we have a question from Haley Brown. Haley, welcome, and please identify yourself and ask your question.
Hey, my name is Haley. I am a research associate at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, which is based in DC. I really appreciate the comments that I've heard so far. One thing that is sticking with me when we're talking about trying to reclaim the Democratic Party for the progressive wing is just that that's been an ongoing thing for a while. And so far it hasn't materialized. And now we're facing a situation where groups like nonprofits like mine that are research oriented and nonprofits that are action oriented and advocacy oriented are seeing their funding slashed like crazy and are really struggling to stay afloat more so than we even were before. So given those conditions, how do we compete with the neoliberal wing of the party that has a lot more cash flow behind it and already has that kind of institutional entrenchment, so that we can try to put forward a big picture progressive vision?
Well, that's a huge question, and of course, it's something we work on. It is absolutely the definition of what we focus on at PDA. Per the fight between progressives and neoliberals within the Democratic Party, it was moribund until, I don't know if people know this, but the organization I'm privileged to lead now, we were the sole national organization to draft Bernie Sanders to run as a Democrat. So we started the Run Bernie Run draft campaign in 2013 and finally persuaded Senator Sanders to run as a Democrat by 2015. And that changed the national political landscape tremendously. Before then, it may be hard to remember back. But by the way, the Democratic Party would not even use the word poverty in its platform. The only references to poverty in the Obama era were related to tax breaks for churches. Other than that, they just refused to use the word even. I mean, the neoliberal Democratic Party, the approach to economics and economic realities in the United States until Sanders comes on the scene, I think it has a huge impact. And so that's really where the battle commences. And I think what has happened there was a big effort institutionally to try to have Democratic mass entryism following the Bernie Sanders effort in 2016. And for the most part, people were rebuffed. But there are about 6 states in the country right now where honest progressives are the chairs of the Democratic Party, one of which is Washington with Shasti Conrad. And there were maybe up to 8. One of them was rebuffed eventually in Nevada. And it's not that all the progressives come in and they really know how to manage things as well as they could. So there's a learning curve there. But I think we're just at a point with the popularity of the Democratic Party and public opinion polls being where they are, in contrast to Bernie Sanders once again being the most popular politician in the country, that we really want to see it as making this battle happen. But you're right, the resources are incredibly imbalanced. And not only that, the experience of the grassroots activist having been rebuffed, and I don't know how much Robert Kuttner knows the story, but Our Revolution was the organization that Sanders founded, had partnered with PDA, and a lot of people tried to join into the party. PDA was involved in getting Keith Ellison to run to be the Democratic Party chair, and he was sort of floating through to become the chair of the Democratic Party, and they sort of constructed Perez as the alternative candidate, and he won. As we know, Sanders was also sort of looking like he was going to win the Democratic nomination in 2020 until there was a behind-the-scenes intervention. And I think it's very difficult when we're so far away from the next nomination of a presidential candidate. What are the mechanisms to transform the party? And that's an open debate, and how I've written articles about it. It's going to be difficult to motivate people, but I do think the base of the party is not with the neoliberal centrists anymore. I think that's pretty clear. How is it possible for a non-moneyed progressive left in the party, other than Bernie Sanders going on tour in every single city in the country, right? How is it possible to get that message across? We're not going to really get a lot of love from MSNBC. We're going to get love from American Prospect. We're going to get love from The Nation. So I'd love to throw it to Bob Kuttner. How does the progressive left consolidate a voice that the Democratic base hears in order to transform the direction of the party?
Yeah,
I think
so good news, bad news story. The bad news story is that the financial disparities are worse than ever. I mean, you've got 18 or 20 Democrats, including some relatively progressive Democrats, now on the take with crypto.
Yeah.
And crypto doesn't just fund conservative Democrats on crypto. It takes out progressive Democrats on a whole range of issues. On the other hand, our story and our ideas are just more popular with the base than their ideas. And we just have to be lighter on our feet and smarter. I mean, if you go back to 2020, if Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders hadn't crowded each other out, one of them would have been the nominee. And Biden only got it by default. And so the soul of the party since 2016, since Hillary fell on her face, has moved left because the circumstances of the life chances of ordinary people have become more and more bleak, and either we define a way out or Trump captures that. So I actually feel hopeful that even though they've got the money, we've got the more compelling narrative.
And let me just add on top of that, Haley, which I completely agree with Robert, is there's 2 ways. One is to have an idea that captures the imagination of the country. And we are of the opinion that the bank is one of those kinds of concepts. And the other is a flag bearer in order to advocate for it. That person remains unidentified, but we have the idea, we have the concept, and more circumstances are forcing the public to have to face this kind of situation because it's going to get desperate. Our next question is from Joe Polito. Joe, please introduce yourself and have your question be given briefly so that we can proceed with the others. So much that we have to present tonight. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Joe Polito, Canada. I'm a big fan of all three presenters. I thought they all did a great job. Quite agreed with the need for public housing and of course Alfeca's story. But my question is for Alan. I think all three people are making the case, how do we reach lots of people? CBS recently reported that something like 60% of Americans are struggling financially to meet their needs. Alan is, I think, pretty well known for his support for FDR's Bill of Economic Rights.
Yeah.
And people are very rights oriented. Bernie, I think, is a class, economic rights oriented kind of guy. So my question would be, can we meld the infrastructure bank story to the economic rights story? Because we have 60% is 200 million Americans. People are looking for their needs to be met.
Well, if I can jump into,
Thank
it's a
you.
great question. And as I do apologize for not having more prepared thoughts. And also, I usually just know what I'm going to talk about and I'm more comfortable doing that. And I'm a little bit foggy headed from kind of getting off of COVID. But one of the things I was trying to make clear is that ideas like the Manufacturing Renaissance Act, and to a degree, the National Infrastructure Bank. Now, we know, obviously, if you look at American history, there were times when the debate about the national bank became a dominant issue in American politics. I think the Economic Bill of Rights framing, which, by the way, Bernie, in some of his speeches on his Fight Oligarchy tour, at about 2/3 of the way through his speech, he pivoted to Roosevelt's final State of the Union address, in which he introduced the idea of a second Bill of Rights, an Economic Bill of Rights. And I think it's a pretty great framing because what it points to is the difference between the United States of America and every other prosperous liberal democracy. Now, we may not be a liberal democracy given the damage that Trump is doing to that side of things. But by the way, it's been heartening to see the election results in Australia, even Germany, but Canada especially, where we can see countries are repelling the idea of this rejection of constitutional democracies. And but I think if you look at right, Bob Kuttner, there are about 20 countries in the world other than the Gulf oil states that qualify as being the wealthiest countries in the world. By the way, all of them were our Cold War allies. Okay. I mean, China, of course, is a massively generating tons and tons of money, but the per capita wealth in China is still way below Western Europe, Canada, Australia, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, and Canada. All of those were our Cold War allies. All of them are liberal democracies now. South Korea may be still a little shaky on that ground, but they have the social democratic social contract. And when you look at the social indices, so you look at economic and social welfare indices, other than those related to aggregate wealth, with only one or two exceptions, the United States is either now at the bottom, near the bottom, at the bottom, or way at the bottom. Okay? And I think there's greater consciousness about this now because of the internet, because of how much consciousness there is in the American public about what goes on internationally compared to 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago. And so the United States is getting a really, really crap deal. And just to sort of put the ribbon into a bow on the top of this sort of, I mean, I want to use a vulgar phrase, I won't, but this lousy social contract that Americans have. America, in the post-World War II period, was largely responsible for a lot of those countries in terms of how they set up their economies. But, across the board, the levels of depression, levels of drug addiction, incarceration, violent crime, and then onto the, wealth disparity and the amount of hours worked per week, the percentage of the population that's living paycheck to paycheck. None of those countries are as bad off as the United States of America. They may not have the, again, aggregate wealth results that you see in the United States of America. But as we know, that's all massively disproportionately going to the wealthier among us. I'd love to have Bob comment on what I said, just because I can't resist having Bob Kuttner comment on what I'm saying. Uh, does that all add up to you, Bob? That the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights signals to the American people we simply can have this much better than we have it right now. Just look at all these other countries.
Yeah, I agree. And I also want to second your point that a lot of the post-war economic order was the work of the United States at a time when the United States was a much more progressive country. That's the irony. So it's stuck to the wall in a lot of these other countries, and it's gotten away from us here. And speaking of getting away from us, I apologize, but I need to go. So thank you for having me, and keep up the important work.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Robert. It was a pleasure, and we
Pleasure's
thank you
all
so
mine.
much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
We're going to have one more question, and then we'll move on to our other speakers tonight, next of which will be Alan. But we will return after the remaining presenters speak in order to run through the rest of the questions that people will have tonight. Dawn, I think you're up next as far as your question is concerned. If you could introduce yourself and briefly ask your question. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Jack. I'm Don Siefkas from San Leandro, California. I'm a retired mid-level General Motors executive from General Motors Design. I'm a very strong supporter of this bill. I've sat in on a lot of Zoom meetings with various congressional staffs, with Alfeca, Stu and Angela and other people. The thing is, I don't think we can make any progress like Alan mentioned, of getting to people in the United States, citizens, without getting this thing on television somehow. I have written and emailed CNBC, MSNBC, anybody I can think of, to ask them to put on one of their business shows, which a lot of rich people watch, okay, or regular people watch, and get this story out on television, because nothing happens in the United States unless it's on TV. So my question to Alan and to Bob, if he was still here, how can we do this? There's 90 people on this call almost. Somebody here has to actually know a TV producer at a local TV station that could invite Alfeca or Stu or Alan on to talk about this bank. I think it's too much to talk about this divide between the liberal and the not so liberal wing of the Democratic Party, but we need to get this bill passed if we're ever going to get this United States moving again. So that's my question. Any ideas?
Yeah. Well, a few things are actually. I also don't want to. Of course, we at PDA we support progressive candidates. Look, Chris Murphy, whoever, it was a moderately centrist Democrat. We want to try to persuade him. We're not going to. I'm not naive enough to believe we're going to have a wipeout of the incumbent Democrats and replacement by progressives. These are very good ideas. They're not necessarily just the orbit of the progressive left, because they're sensible ideas, right? So I concur with that. Here's the thing about the TV networks. That's one of the reasons I'm not really connecting things as clearly as I usually do. One of the reasons the Democratic Party is so important in this is the Democratic Party adopting these policies, whether it's just the National Infrastructure Bank or it's the totality of the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights. If you have a two-party system and one of the two parties is supporting these, it will get onto television. So that battle inside the Democratic Party is essential, because I think the Republican Party is lost to us right now. And on top of that, we can have some pretty essential economic policies that challenge the status quo economic order, not only because the public is dissatisfied with them, but because that space opens up when you're the only opposition party to a Republican Party that seems hell-bent on shredding our constitutional republic. And, I think the journalism class, the class of people who make up journalists, even at the top corporate journalism outlets, I think on balance, they're not favorably disposed towards the shredding of the Constitution in the way the Trump administration is proceeding. So if you have a Democratic Party that supports the National Infrastructure Bank, then they're going to eventually make it to all of those TV platforms. So I think the battle inside the Democratic Party is also a very pragmatic approach and probably the only route that I see to getting onto those platforms, because CNBC and Bloomberg, they're entirely responsive to an economic conception of reality that's driven by Wall Street numbers. So it's very hard to make a breakthrough there into the practical matters of how things like infrastructure operate in the country.
And Alan, let me just add to that we have found that support for our National Infrastructure Bank, HR 4052, has received and obtained support from across the spectrum of the Democratic Party,
Right.
from the left and the right and the centrist. So, from AOC to SWOSY, we cover it all, and that is leverage that we need to continue asserting in order to get truly national media focused on what this bill can accomplish. We're now going to move on to our next presenter, Ellen Brown, an American author, attorney, public speaker, and advocate for financial reform, most prominently public banking. She's the founder of the Public Banking Institute, a nonpartisan think tank devoted to the creation of public-run banks. She's appeared on cable and network television, radio, on internet programs and podcasts, and several of our Zoom calls. So welcome again tonight, Ellen. It's always great to have you, and we're anxious to hear your
I
comments.
was told that I have 4 minutes or less to give a history of this idea and the fact that the National Infrastructure Bank is not a new idea. We have done it before very successfully. In 1791, we had just beaten the British, but the country was drowning in debt with no unified currency or credit system. Alexander Hamilton, our first U.S. Treasury Secretary, solved the problem with debt for equity swaps. State debt was accepted in partial payment for stock in the first U.S. bank, paying a 6% dividend. That was for debt and gold were to back the stock. The bank leveraged this capital into credit, issued as the first U.S. currency. Hamilton wrote, "It is a well-established fact that banks in good credit can circulate a far greater sum than the actual quantum of their capital in gold and silver." So that's basically the fractional reserve system that the Bank of England was using and that the goldsmiths used before that. These new credit dollars were lent to the government and private interests for internal improvements and other economic development. So that's how the first U.S. bank differed from the Bank of England, was that the purpose was to be infrastructure and development, according to Hamilton's system of public credit. By 1811, the bank had boosted commerce and laid the foundation for early industrialization, canals, roads, and early factories. The second U.S. bank then expanded on this model, including the Erie Canal, which you see there. The Hamiltonian model was used again in the Great Depression when U.S. banks were bankrupt. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation, founded by President Hoover, for the purpose of saving the banks, which didn't work, but it was repurposed by Roosevelt's government to fund development. It started with a modest $500 million in capitalization. It issued bonds for its liquidity. It lent or invested over $50 billion over the next 25 years, which of course today would be hundreds of billions. It funded the New Deal and World War II, rebuilt the depressed economy, and returned a net profit to the government. So we need off-budget financing like the RFC, which can fund programs without legislative approval or budget expenditure. And our solution, obviously, is HR 4052. Like the first U.S. bank, it will be capitalized with federal securities, paying a 2% dividend, redeemable after 20 years. It's designed to be a depository bank, creating money as deposits when it makes loans, as all banks do, as Alfeca said. But if we don't get enough deposits for liquidity, the RFC, like the RFC, it can issue bonds. It can lend $5 trillion over a period of years and rebuild our infrastructure, reindustrialize the economy, and restore the middle class. That's all I got. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellen. As always, we greatly appreciate your comments and your presence and support. Next, we have a speaker that has joined our effort recently and has really made major contributions in supporting our efforts. Randy Voller, who is president-elect of the Orange Chatham Board of Realtors. He's a former chairman of the North Carolina Democratic Party and Chatham County Democratic Party, as well as a four-term mayor of Pittsboro, North Carolina, and he's the host of a popular radio show. Randy, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Jack. Alan, I just wanted to say something to you. When I was state party chair, I didn't know, I knew the PDA was involved with Bernie, and I was a delegate for him in 2016. But we hosted something called the Blue South Project, and Bernie came to Raleigh, and I have video right when he first announced and before he was announcing when he was actually floating the trial balloon. So thank you. I've tried to help Bernie all along, and I think that if we pushed his ideas, we'd be much further along. I guess all I want to say is I got to know these folks at the convention last year, went to some presentations, and I was quite familiar with, as my background was history, and quite familiar with the FDR era, but I really got to know it a lot better in getting to know these folks and reading some of the books, including the one by Fenberg, which is a great read. And as a local official, I would just say that we need, and I agree with what Robert Kuttner said, it's not that we're throwing out federal funding or state funding. We need to have other tools in the toolbox, and this is an elegant tool to combine with what you can already do when you're a locally elected official, whether you're doing it through bonding or raising or tax revenue or trying to go through the local government commission of your state. It would be nice to have another avenue to approach to address the problems that face public officials, especially those in counties and municipalities where we are very, very close to the people. And so close, in fact, that I used to get many phone calls at 1 a.m. from constituents, much to my wife's chagrin, because I always kept my phone on and I wanted to be accessible. My congressman was never that accessible, by the way. And I really think that if we can get this done, it's going to go a long way to addressing the problems in our community. So for instance, right now, data that I'm looking at either from the real estate side or from other sources, 33% of the households in our country's money is spent on housing, which is one of the key parts of this plan. Another 17% transportation, which is also in this plan. So 50% of what we spend are housing and transport without getting into everything else. So I feel, having served locally and worked regionally and statewide, that if we can just push this across the finish line, if all of us will go to our state reps and go to our congressional members and say, look, this is going back to the future. This is not something that's newfangled. It was tried before. Republicans and Democrats have done this before. It adds $0 to the deficit, $0 to the debt, and it's going to actually employ people in your community so that when you are out in your community, the dollars are staying there because the people that are benefiting this, which is all of us, are actually getting jobs, and that money is circulating in our communities. It's really worth fighting for this, which is why I'm spending a lot of time in supporting this organization, because I do not think we're going to get there through austerity. I never have. I've always thought you can't prune yourself into success. And I've never believed that these neoliberal economic policies are the ones that are going to actually get us across the finish line. It's going to be something like this. So I'm always available to try to offer any insight I can. I'm working as hard as I can on our state legislators and our congressional delegation. I'll be in DC next week, and I hope all of you could just do a little bit and do the same, because this is actually going to be the one thing that I believe is going to make a difference, not just for our generation and, I guess, getting rid of the stench of Trumpism, but actually making a difference for our children and grandchildren. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Randy, and appreciate your comments.
Can
Now
I
we're going
jump
to
in for
go.
a second?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, let me just make one comment that I think hasn't been said. There is no alternative. There is no possibility with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party of funding another major infrastructure bill. It can't happen. It's not going to happen. It is not going to happen at the state level. It cannot happen at the local level. There is no adequate alternative source of money. That's the first thing. Second of all, if we can't, we're never going to get out of the debt that we have as a national country, as a country, if we don't grow the economy. It isn't just a matter of building bridges. It's a matter of hiring people to make the steel to build the bridges. It's a matter of increasing the GDP growth rate by 4 to 5%, which this can do, and nothing else can do it. And therefore, the debt becomes a smaller and smaller percentage of a growing GDP, which is how we got up 125% debt after World War II. It's not new. You know, the point is there really isn't an alternative. There is no possibility of this country building enough adequate housing to satisfy the needs of the coming generation. You know, these kids are working, but they're not earning enough money, even with two people working, to basically buy a house. We've been here before. After World War II, we had millions of soldiers coming home. When they left, they were 18, 19. They didn't want to go home to mommy. They wanted to have a house of their own and make babies. And that's what they did. And we built houses for them, millions of houses. There's money in this bill to build those houses. There is no possibility of the private sector generating enough money to build housing that at the wage level that our young people can afford. It's just not there. It's not possible to be there.
Agreed.
So, I mean, I could go on, but I mean, I guess what I want to stress is that people really need to think in the terms of, if you're going to address all the problems that Alpaca and others have identified, and I've only touched on a couple of them. We haven't talked about infrastructure for electricity or water or whatever. You know, this is the only way out. And I think that it's got to be that sense that does it. And that can attract a lot of the supporters of Trump. A lot of the working class supporters of Trump who can understand housing, can understand water for food, to grow food and what have you, can understand all of this.
Yeah.
You know, better
Jack,
transportation.
why don't we have Alan Minsky comment?
Alan, would you like to comment on that?
I was checking in with my daughter. Just explain to me what I need to comment on.
Andy was just saying that he sees there being no other remedy or idea or concept or path forward without adopting the bank as far as.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think the bank's a great idea. And I agree that everything has gone very slowly in the current processes. So returning to how, and when Bob was on and I asked him about the funding, of course, he's talking about direct federal funding, and things weren't so tied up, but obviously the bank was in place as well during that time. So it was facilitating things, in the way that it was at that point. So I don't disagree. But I was curious listening to him just a few minutes ago about the Society of Civil Engineers. Are they just so non-political that they won't endorse this idea, or are they willing to endorse this idea? Because, we always hear about, their grading of our infrastructure being like a D minus, Yeah.
Becca?
They, in principle, support the notion of a national infrastructure bank. They have it on their report on their website. We've spoken with them. They're considering whether they would, step up their support for the NIB. And we try to. Their last report card is very focused on making sure they don't lose the base funding coming from the federal government for the transportation reauthorization, and they're not focused on anything else. And we want to tell them, look, your gap that you measure is now up to $3.9 trillion. This is the only way that gap is going to be filled. Wouldn't you like to support our bank? So they're considering.
Thank you. Yeah. By the way, I probably should go just because I need to take care of my daughter's, help her out in prepping for her final. So I want to thank everybody for this. This is great. And of course, PDA completely supports the National Infrastructure Bank proposal and always consider us as partners on this project. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight, Alan. We greatly appreciate it, and best of luck to your daughter on her final.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. Next, we're going to move to Randy as far as his question is concerned. And then I saw one or two other, another question, and then Scott. Go ahead, Randy.
Hey, hi, Randy Grine. I've been involved for about 3 years in this. I'm from Western Washington, and Scott Aldridge is actually one of my colleagues in the Democratic Party. I actually have a couple of comments and a few questions. The first, in no particular order, the Society of Civil Engineers for 2025, I believe, upped their assessment to $9.1 trillion. Is that correct?
So, sorry. Yes. The beauty of the American Society of Civil Engineer report cards is they divide the infrastructure needs into three parts: the total that is needed to fix everything, and then the part that is already being funded by the federal government, state and local governments, private capital markets, and then the final thing is what's left over, the gap that's not financed. And so we have attached ourselves onto that. What their latest report card shows is that for those 18 categories, the unfunded gap is, I think it's 3.7 trillion, not 3.9. I apologize. But that's the beauty of it. So what we can do is attach right onto that and say, our bank is going to fill that gap, and there's no other way to do it.
Next, let's go to Leandra. Could you please introduce yourself and briefly ask your question? Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Leandra Schuler, and I volunteer with the New Mexico Democrats, Albuquerque, New Mexico. I would have to agree. I wanted to agree with Andy that this seems like one of the few ways that we could actually help our own economy. And I was going to say that one of the big things that I think lost Democrats was the reason we kept telling them that the economy was good, and they were suffering. They weren't being able to afford things. So when you can't afford things and you're getting told that things are great, and you hear Trump saying that things are messed up, but he's going to fix things for you, I think that's what attracted to them. And most of people who liked Bernie tended to go to Trump. So I'm thinking that there's that correlation. But the thing I was going to mention is, what if we push explain to the Democrats that they were always talking about what's wrong, but what if we show them that this NIB is going to help people, and talk to people about it as, we are going to help you. We are bringing this bank to help you, and how it will help communities. Like, that could be something that brings the party together in itself. And lastly, I was going to say, have we decided, Heather Cox Richardson has a pretty good, reaches a lot of people, and maybe she might be someone that we use to bridge this to the American public. And that's all. Thank you.
Leandra, thank you so much for your comments. We greatly appreciate them, and note that 3 congressional members from New Mexico are co-sponsors of our legislation. So you have great roots there in New Mexico. So thank you. Scott, I'll circle back to you for another question. So you have the floor.
This is less a question and more me plugging an alternate solution to the infrastructure problem in the country. I'm wondering if anyone has heard of the Strong Towns development thesis. So the basic idea is that the depreciation of infrastructure scales with miles of infrastructure. And so by switching to a more dense development pattern and walking more and getting people out of cars, we can reduce the infrastructure costs over the long term. And so I've been working with a number of urbanist groups and on the east side of Washington, in Washington State, to achieve this sort of development pattern by going into multimodal and more pedestrian-based urban design, so that you don't need to build as large and as heavy and as rapidly depreciating as you do for car-based cities. Otherwise, I would definitely support. I do think that would also be aided by an infrastructure bank, and I just want to say this is a great idea.
Thank you, Scott. Other questions? Randy, did you have anything else?
Yes, I did. Just one point. There was some discussion earlier about two-party system. That is actually covered in Diverger's law. I had a curiosity about that myself a few years ago and recapitulated it, not knowing that it had already been done. But it's easy to show in math how it works, and it has everything to do with the fact that we vote for one person for one position, with first past the post, or winner take all elections. And unless we're going to consider completely reworking our election system, we're stuck with two parties. And the larger the voting pool, the stronger that tendency is. And if anybody's really interested, I can show you in about 5-10 minutes.
Thank you, Randy. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions before we start wrapping things up tonight? It was a well-attended Zoom call, and we're very appreciative of everyone joining us. And I thought we had some excellent speakers tonight, and also great questions.
Joe Sackman is on, raising his hand.
Oh, I didn't see him. Joe, welcome, and we're so glad to have you join us. Go ahead.
Thanks. It was a great call. I listened to a lot of it. I think earlier a point was made, about how trying to contain Trump. But this is really kind of like an opportunity of crisis. We're seeing with the reconciliation bill and that $1 trillion in cuts to social services and Medicaid, Medicare, et cetera. And states are going to be scrambling to deal with deficits. New York is going to deal with a $13 billion yearly deficit with these cuts. And so we're talking about, let's talk about the future. We want to talk about the bank and the bank being part of the future and how to solve the issues that we're dealing with. And a lot of these issues are integrated into each other. So I think one way of approaching this is discussing all these other issues and how the bank is part of the solution to these issues that we're dealing with, instead of just siloing the bank into it of itself. Because when we are on these calls, and a lot of us are on these calls, with our legislators, we are describing the needs of like infrastructure when it comes to housing and it comes to, lead pipes, et cetera. And so we're dealing with, infrastructure as being the basis of, like, if we want to build green new energy, if we want to deal with, environmental justice, or we want to deal with housing justice, it's all there and it's all integrated. And I think we talk more about that because those issues, I think, really hit home with a lot of people. That'll be one way to really get people talking about the bank and, when they're talking about solutions. So just putting that out there as we, as we try to push this forward.
Thank you, Joe. And could you just briefly describe your role in New York and the efforts that you're involved with?
Yeah. I sit on the executive committee of the New York Progressive Action Network. I'm also the executive director of the Long Island Progressive Coalition. And I think I've sat on calls with most of everyone here, with a lot of our Democratic legislators in Congress and, locally. I mean, that's I think one of the great tactics that we use is we go really local to build up support for the bank, because I think whenever we talk to our like local county legislators and state representatives, and we say, hey, we've got this great idea, it's the National Infrastructure Bank, and they go, oh yeah, this is great. We would need this, because they're always scrambling for money, right? It's always money. It comes down to it. We don't have the money for this. We don't have the money for that. And we have huge infrastructure problems with just, roads deteriorating. In New York, now it's heavy rain and we lose roads. We get flooding. We have counties that are probably the biggest counties going in at least the Northeast that are unsewered. So we're way behind our infrastructure, and they don't have the money for it, and so they don't do it. And I live on an island, so when the sea level rises, if we don't do something to deal with preventing the sea level rise from encroaching on our water sources, et cetera, we're going to lose parts of our island, right? So we know that there's a necessity for this, and we're able to have, I think, some really great conversations with our local electeds who understand the need and have sort of the political will to pressure our congressional delegates to get on board. We've been very successful with, and I think you mentioned this earlier, like we have Swazi and we have AOC on the bill, right? And I think the majority of the Democratic delegation, not any Republicans yet, but we might get there. So yeah, this is I wear many hats in New York, and I wear the right one when I need to when we talk about the bank. So.
Well, we greatly appreciate all the hats that you wear, especially the one that supports the National Infrastructure Bank. And I can't agree with you more with regard to the strategy that I feel as if the coalition has employed as far as building a grassroots network and support throughout the entire country that just keeps building. And the reason why it increases is because when people hear the idea, it makes sense. So we will continue with that approach, and we're going to get ready to wrap things up tonight. We're going to have a couple slides to show you. The PDA, which Alan is the executive director of, a great organization that has been very supportive of our efforts. We urge you to check out their website and consider the work that they do. Very practical, very functional, and they have a very extensive network throughout the country. Also, The American Prospect, a great publication that focuses on important political matters and issues that you don't see, comparatively speaking, in mainstream media. It's an excellent publication. Urge you to also go to that website and even consider a subscription. Next, here is our National Infrastructure Bank Coalition website. Please visit it. We are adding to it all the time. It updates you on what the most recent developments are. And at this moment of crisis, as I would describe it, and as we approach a critical mass as far as the needs of our country not being fulfilled, we have to promote the bank as much as possible. And speaking of promoting the bank, here on our website is a flyer that you are able to print, which includes a code to take you to the website, and you're able to easily print it and distribute it to people that are interested, family, friends, and your political acquaintances or the public at large. Finally, I want to, well, maybe not finally, but point out to you, as you all know, it takes money to accomplish these kinds of things. And we very much appreciate the support that those of you have donated and given to us in the past. And we ask that you continue doing so. And those that haven't, please consider supporting us. This is a movement that has traction, that has validity, that has legitimacy, and I dare say it is truly an American concept that our country needs to reestablish as we have 4 times in the past. Finally, here's our information page, which shows our website, our Facebook site, Twitter, I hate calling it X, and email. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I think it was a very special presentation. We had very authoritative people doing so and joining us, and the questions were excellent too. We're building momentum. Please continue supporting this effort, and we thank you and wish you a great evening.